Welcome back to the solutions to the free LawPrep. We've been studying the logical reasoning section in this test. In this video, we will deal with a very interesting type of logical reasoning questions. Questions in which you will have to see as to which option justifies the reasoning or the argument that is given to you in the passage. Let us proceed with the questions.
Right, pause the video, solve the question yourself, and then we'll go for this together. Okay, let's solve it. Before getting into the details of the question, remember to pay attention to the structure. Remember to understand as to what the question expects of you, and then you'd find that you're able to read a lot more actively. So you can see the question statement first. It says, each of the following principles, that means you have some principles in here, if valid, helps to justify the social critic's argument, except. So what you can see simply by reading this statement is that in here you have the 5 options and they give you 5 principles, right? And it also tells you that there's a social critic's argument here, which means basically this person's argument is in here, okay? And it says that out of these 5 options, these 5 principles, 4 of these help justify the argument, okay? And only one of these does not, okay? And that is the exception, and that is our answer. So you first try to understand the argument, okay? And then think in your head of some things that may not justify and that may. Then when you get to the options, you kind of have something in your mind and you're reading it actively. Let's go for this together. So let us first just focus on the passage and then proceed to the options thereafter. It reads, social critic. Most doctors believe that the trinkets and convention gifts, these look like difficult words out here, but don't worry when you're solving the questions of the LSAT India. Very, very rarely will you find the need to actually know the difficult vocabulary in the question. Most of the times, intelligent guesswork and understanding the concept will allow you to solve the question without any problems. Okay, so even after striking out these 2 words, you'd find that the sentence makes absolute sense for the purpose of getting the question right. It reads, many doctors believe that the gifts lavished on them by certain pharmaceutical companies do not bias them in favor of those companies in the prescription or purchase of medicines. So what this means is, let's say this is a doctor, okay? Let me make him look a little more like a doctor by drawing the stethoscope. So here you go, you have the stethoscope. Okay, this looks like a doctor. Now it says that this doctor, if let's say a company X, a pharmaceutical company gives him a gift, let's say it's a box of sweets, or maybe it's a phone, okay? Let's say the doctor receives these gifts from the pharmaceutical company. This does not bias him when he starts prescribing his drugs. So let's say this is the medicine that has been made by X. You have by the company X, and the same medicines are also made by a company Y. It says it does not bias him in favor of X. Okay, so doctors believe that the gifts that they receive do not bias them in favor of a company. Goes on to say that, but the very act of receiving a gift sets up a culturally conditioned sense of obligation to reciprocate, which means that once he receives this, well, there's a mindset because of which he may want to reciprocate, and he may be inclined towards X because, it's culturally conditioned. And then the argument goes on to say that thus it is incumbent upon professional medical associations to forbid their members to accept such complementary items. Again, if you don't understand incumbent, make it simple. Thus, let's look at the simplified version of this sentence. Let's say, thus, professional medical associations should forbid their members to accept such complementary items. Let us look at the argument now. It says, doctors believe that there's no bias from accepting gifts, okay? But you see something to the contrary. It says, gifts imply reciprocation. Thus, gifts should not be accepted. The exception that we're looking for should either weaken or not affect the argument, right? There are three pieces in this argument. If you can weaken any one of these, it will weaken it, or maybe if it does not affect any of these, it means that it has not helped justify. When we go to the options, let us see them one by one. Let us go for the options one by one, starting with option A. Okay, the principle given in option A is, as you saw, that each one of these is giving a principle. So the principle in option A is professional associations should not monitor the effectiveness of their members. Okay, and if you see here, it talks about professional medical associations. So the principle here, which will apply even to medical associations because it talks about professional associations as such, it says professional associations should not monitor their members. In this case here, you see the conclusion says professional medical associations should forbid their members. Now, as you can see, these are quite contradictory, because for this conclusion to hold, it is required that professional medical associations should monitor, whereas here it says it should not monitor, and this makes it quite clear that A is the answer. But still, let's look at the other options, okay, one by one. You can see why they're wrong. Look at B. So basically we know that these four would be helping justify, right? Look at option B. It says professional associations are obligated to ensure. So they're obligated and therefore they should forbid. Works well. Option C. The perceived need to reciprocate should not be allowed to override. Right, so there's a need to reciprocate. It should not override. Very good. Therefore you should forbid. Okay. Option D. The professional responsibilities of doctors should be given the highest priority. Again, you can see that justifies. Their responsibility is to not be biased, so you must not allow things that have a sense or a chance of bias. Option E. Any activity that impairs professionals in fulfilling their responsibilities should be curtailed. Right? So we saw that there is a possibility that it could give them a bias, so you should forbid or curtail it. So A is the answer. Right, then, even at the cost of repetition, I'd urge you to pause the video and solve the question yourself first. Do not watch this like some TV series. It's not going to help you. Okay? Let's go for this together now. When you see the question structure, it's very similar to the previous question that we saw. There's one difference though. You see here that it says which one of the following principles, so you have 5 principles here, if valid, most helps to justify. In the previous question, it said that there were 5 principles, okay, and out of them 4 were justifying and 1 was not justifying. In this question, again you have 5 options. It is possible that maybe all 5 of them are justifying, okay, but you are to pick the one that justifies the most. Well, it's also possible that something here does not justify, but I'm saying that you have to pick the one that justifies the most. It's important for you to have that mindset when you're looking at the options. Remember that if you do not completely understand where you're going, if you do not understand clearly as to what the argument here is, if you do not understand the reasoning here, reading these options is really taking you nowhere. You'd find all the options to be appealing. You don't know what you're reading them for. You'll just waste time, mark the wrong answer and move to the next question. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's have a look at the argument or the reasoning. The columnist says the government must continue to regulate television. Now this looks like a conclusion, it looks like the final statement. What follows is that it says failure to do so would initially result in blah blah blah. Now what it is saying here is that, hey, you should do this. If you don't do this, then something will happen. Let's see what that is. It says failure to do so, which means failure to regulate television, would initially result in an economic growth from an increased number of stations and an increased viewership, but at a cost of an even more alarming decrease in literacy than we are already experiencing. So if you do not regulate, there will be some economic growth initially, but there will be an even steeper decrease in literacy. Okay, it says that in turn would lead to further deterioration of the reasoning abilities of voters. If there's lower literacy, lower reasoning abilities of voters, eventually undermining the political stability that is necessary for long-term growth. So it says that eventually you will lose the political stability that is needed for long-term growth. So let's look at this together. It says if there is unregulated television, there'll be more viewership, lower literacy, poor voting, poor stability, and it will affect economic growth in the long term, right? So unregulated television might give you economic growth in the short term. That's what you see here. Initially, it could give you economic growth in the short term, but eventually it will affect economic growth in the long term. Therefore, you should regulate television, is what the conclusion says. Once you've been able to understand this argument, finding the answer is not a problem. Let us look at the options now. Now, the right answer, the option that is correct, the one that helps justify the most, is either going to support this at some point, at some stage, or it is going to support the conclusion. Let us see. Pause the video and try to pick the answer yourself. I'm giving you the answer in a bit. Once you understand that this argument basically is that you must regulate television because although it may give you some gains in the short term, it will not give you gains in the long term. Once you understand this, it becomes very obvious that the right answer is E. Look at the principle. It says governmental policies that help maintain long-term economic goals should be favored over those that produce short-term goals. So you see, when you have television that is not regulated, okay, you will have short-term economic growth but will not have long-term economic growth. Now you're saying here that we should not have this. It means it supports long-term over short-term, right? That's what the principle is, and that you can find in option E. Look at the other options, spend some time to realize and understand as to why they are not right. Let us move ahead. Right, so pause the video, try solving the question yourself, and then we'll go for it together. Now the question statement here is kind of interesting. It reads, which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the difference in ultraviolet protection? It is interesting because if you can see here, you can't really understand the question statement or what it means until you have first understood as to what the passage is about, what the argument above is about. This is not the case with all questions, let me tell you. For example, you might have a question, a problem, the question statement of which reads that which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument above. So you understand the question statement without having read the passage. In this case, however, you can see from here that you have to read the passage to be able to understand as to what the question statement means. Even so, there's still something that you do get by having read this question statement, because it talks about explaining the difference. Okay, so the difference between what? So you know what you're going to look at when you read the passage. The importance of reading the question statement is that when you go to the argument, when you go to the passage, you go there with a certain sense of direction and purpose. This streamlines your thought and allows you to stay focused and actively engage with the text. Let's do this now. If you've not yet paused the video and had a look at this text, do that right now. Okay, let's go for it now. It says, many types of sunglasses, although they filter visible sunlight, fail to block the sun's invisible ultraviolet rays, which can cause eye damage. Okay, so it says that let's say you have the sunglasses. Let's say this rectangle represents the sunglasses. Okay, then you say that there are many types of glasses. It says here many types of glasses that fail to block the ultraviolet rays, although they filter out the visible sunlight. So it says that a certain kind of ray, set of rays is filtered out but does not block UV. Let's go ahead. It goes on to say that among these types of sunglasses, those with very dark lenses will not protect against damage from ultraviolet rays, as well as sunglasses with clearer lenses will. So it talks about two categories. Within this, so among this, it talks about those that have clearer lenses and those that have very dark lenses. Okay. Now perhaps you remember that the question was talking about the difference between something. And this, as we can see, is the difference in UV protection that is offered between the very dark lenses and the clearer lenses, whereby we see that the clear lens offers better UV protection than the dark lens. So this difference has to be explained. In other words, the requirement of the question is, what is it that explains the fact that despite the fact that neither the dark lens nor the clear lens blocks UV rays. So we know that both of these come within the category of this type here, this type that does not block UV rays. So despite the fact that neither the dark lens nor the clear lens blocks UV rays, what is it? What is the explanation for the fact that the clear lens is better than the dark lens as far as damage protection from ultraviolet is concerned? What is it that makes dark lenses worse than clear lenses as far as UV protection is concerned, despite the fact that neither the dark lens nor the clear lens blocks UV rays? This is the question, right? So as you can see, it takes a lot of clear thought and effort and practice to be able to identify and understand as to what the requirement of the question is. Once you've arrived at that, picking the right answer isn't really so hard. If you want, you can pause the video and try picking the right answer by yourself, and then of course I'll give you the answer in a moment. Okay, so the answer is, okay, before we look at the answer, let's look at a couple of wrong options maybe. Let's look at option A. It says that the results of the damage from ultraviolet rays usually appear only after many years of exposure to sunlight. Does this explain our pressing question? No. Let's look at option D maybe. It says many people select their sunglasses on the basis of style rather than on the basis of the protection. Does not explain this. Look at option E, which is the right answer, by the way. So let me just strike out A so that you don't get confused. So E is the right answer. It says that very dark lenses filter out more light than clearer lenses do. It filters out visible light, remember, okay, not the UV, because neither of these filters out the UV. It says it filters out more light than clearer lenses do, causing the eye's pupils to widen and admit more ultraviolet rays than would enter if the pupils did not widen. So what the dark lenses do is they make your pupils widen, so there's more UV getting in and therefore there's greater damage. So that's why, despite the fact that neither is blocking, at least the clearer lenses don't make you admit more ultraviolet light, and therefore this provides the explanation that we need, right?